trying to allow people to get settled in. So if you see me waiting on the side sometime, that's why. I want you to get the whole thing. As I study throughout the week, kind of pressed for time, but also, I get excited about the study, and I get into the study, and I try to get every detail I can. Of course, I'm going to forget a lot of details. But with that, as I was driving up here this morning, I think, well, you know what? I think I'm going to change something. That's what I did. Change a little bit of what I was going to do. So if I get kind of lost or something, just kind of bear with me. Okay, so this morning, I just wanted to kind of do something a little different. Of course, you won't know that, just me. And so we are in the book of James. We're in the book of James. I think maybe 3 weeks have passed by since Ron's been teaching. He's went over the first chapter, and he's doing a great job with that in detail. I like his details, teaching me some things that I haven't realized before. A lot of things Ron has said that I hadn't realized before. And so it's always good to have different kinds of teaching. We're in the book of James. Now, again, I may refer back to the first chapter. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. But I just want to make sure that we get a good grip of the book that we are studying. I think it's so important that we go back to the basic rules of study. I don't know how you study, and keep this in mind, please. Keep this in mind. If I go back to be too basic, you don't let it. I don't want to insult your intelligence. I know you probably know a lot. You study. You might study more than me. I don't know, but I don't want to insult your intelligence. But I want to go back and make sure everybody understands. If you don't, then you have to understand how to do this. So we've been in the book of James. We went over chapter 1, and now we're going to begin chapter 2. I don't know how far we'll get, maybe not very far. But we want to kind of look at some things. Now, there is a question here that I'm going to ask you, and I want you to participate. Get your little wheels rolling and kind of think on this as I ask the question. We're going into chapter 2, and it has to do with the assembly. It has to do with people coming in. It has to do with how we behave when people come in. It has to do with attitude. It has to do with God's faith. That is the New Testament faith. That is the system of faith that a Christian should live by. There's a lot of things going on in here in these moving parts in the second chapter. And I don't want you to lose any of it. I want you to get all of it, but a lot of that's going to come in your own study. Okay? And so I'm going to begin the reading, and I want you to listen carefully. I'm going to read the first section of the second chapter from verse 1 to verse 7. That's what we're going to stick to this one, from verse 1 to verse 7. There's a unit of thought there. I don't want to start jumping over and getting too ahead, but there's a unit of thought in James chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. Let's go ahead and begin the reading. My brethren, have not faith for our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons, and I emphasize that. Verse 2 and following, for if these come unto you in assembly, a man with a gold ring and goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and you have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, stand thou there, and sit here under my footstool. Are you not then partial in yourselves, or become judges of evil thoughts? Hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom, that is the church, which he hath promised to them that love him? Verse 6, but ye have despised the poor. Do not the rich oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats? Do not they blaspheme the worthy name by which we are called? What is that worthy name? Christ. Christ. That's the worthy name. Christ. Christian. What is a Christian? A Christian belongs to Christ. Keep that in mind. A Christian belongs to Christ. And if a Christian belongs to Christ, he has to behave in a certain way. not play acting, not hypocrisy, but to really try and be that. And brethren, becoming a Christian is easy. It's easy to become a Christian. You want to know the hard part? Continuing to be a Christian. That's the hard part. And you know what? It's really not hard if you get your mind right. If not exercising that pattern of every step of God's law. It's not hard if you keep doing that. It's kind of like getting up in the morning. You don't like getting up at 6 o'clock, start doing it. Get up at 6 o'clock every morning. You know what? You're going to wake up before 6 o'clock. It's a pattern that you set that's going to come easy once you start. It may be hard in your decision making at the first, but once you become that, it becomes a lot easier. But we have to start somewhere. Now I read verse 1 to about verse 7. There's a unit of thought here, and that's how you want to take it. That's how you want to study the Bible. You don't want to study the whole thing. When you start picking it apart, you want to use it as a unit of thought. Now, I've got a question for you. And I want you to think about it. I'm going to ask two questions. What is discrimination, and what do you think about it? What is discrimination, and what do you think about it? Now, somebody answer that for me. I know y'all got thinking minds. Somebody answer that. This is a class.
It's when you think you're better than somebody else.
Okay. When you think you're better than somebody else, right? Okay. Somebody else?
When you feel like you're the judge of what someone else should have or do or
Okay.
move or think.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I didn't hear what the last comment was, but looking down upon people
Okay.
and, pardon me, and not following the wisdom and guidance of God, because God has looked out of his life. So
Okay.
what right do we have?
Right. Okay. Anybody else? What is discrimination, and how do you think about it? Yes, sir.
Discrimination is a judgment, and it can be either right or wrong, depending on what you're discriminating against or for.
Okay. That's what I'm looking for. You have something, Ms. Teresa?
I was just going to say similar, judging who is worthy where. You can go all the way back to the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
When you had the buses, who could sit on the bus, and you had who could drink at the water fountain.
Right.
One person's more worthy to drink out of the water fountain than another.
Okay. You believe that?
No.
I'm glad you said no. I want everybody to hear that. I'm glad you said that. Yes, sir.
Well, Teresa mentioned civil rights, but it goes back even Bible
Right.
times. You know, we know the Samaritans and how the Jews looked down on them, even though they wouldn't even go through their country. They'd go around their country, go out of the way just to stay away from those people
Mm-hmm.
who were really their kinfolks in some ways.
That's right.
They had erred and gone off and married foreign people, and they were a mixed race rather than a pure Jewish race. But you know, that it's evident throughout the Bible that there was wholesale discrimination on a lot of levels all through there between Jews and other people.
Right. Yeah, you can go all the way back past that. You go to the Jews and the discrimination. They mixed in with Samaritans and they became half and half. Yes, ma'am.
Yet the only person that Jesus point blank told, I am the Christ, was a Samaritan woman.
Okay. All right. Anybody else about discrimination? What is discrimination and what do you think about it?
There's one righteous judge and it's God.
There certainly is, and it is God. That's right. He is the righteous judge. Which way he judges is the right way because he's righteous. Okay? We need to understand our culture today kind of defaults back to discrimination. And every time you open up a Webster's dictionary or any other kind of dictionary today, as I've seen, it's mostly going to talk about that negative terminology of discrimination. Of course, there's a good term. There's a good way to discriminate also. Keep that in mind. There's a good way to discriminate, and there is a negative way, a bad way, an evil way to discriminate. So I want to take that term, discrimination, and I want to apply it to what it means sometimes. okay? Besides what our culture says. In a negative sense, the discrimination stems from various things such as wealth, age, sex, race, culture, class, etc. And it continues on. The root of this problem germinates from selfishness and preservation of one's own interests only. Now watch this. Discrimination, by definition, sometimes, and back in the 17th century English, listen to this, discrimination, by definition, is not always a negative term. There was a young man on the phone one day, and he was discriminating to a lady. He said, I'm not discriminating against you. And I said, yeah, you are. He was in front of a crowd. I said, you are discriminating. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You're discriminating, but it's on a good note. And so when he says, I'm not discriminating, yeah, he didn't understand. He was discriminating, but it's not a bad thing. That's why I'm trying to impress upon you this morning. When we use that term discrimination, it's not always a bad thing. You have to discriminate against people that you're not going to hang out with, like drunkards, like homosexuals. Different things you're going to apply because you discriminate. I'm going to discriminate. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to smoke cigarettes. You're discriminating. So it can be a good thing. I'm going to serve the God of the Bible versus denominationalism. I'm going to discriminate against that. It's not a bad thing. And that's what I want to impress upon this audience and Facebook, that it is not a bad thing all the time. Yes, sir.
On the first day of football season for practice, the kids show up. If you can't discriminate between who's going to make a good quarterback and who's going to make a good center, then you're going to lose.
Amen.
But I've noticed that discrimination was popular with writing at the time of Christ, but it's never used in the gospel. The word itself.
Right. Okay. So we have to understand, that's what I want to impress upon your minds this morning, that when you hear the word discrimination, don't let your mind just go to, okay, that's bad, it's not good. Understand the definition that I'm giving to you this morning. Yes, sir.
A good thing that helps me is to discriminate between things and not people. Don't discriminate between people, because everybody is, like James was saying here, you know, that we bless God with the same mouth we bless God, and we curse men who are created in the image of God. People are created in the image of God. What they do is what you discriminate against, good or bad.
Right.
Not the person. It's kind of the same as saying hate the sin, but not the sinner.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That type of thing. Discriminate against things, not against people.
And right, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I have written down. It's to discern, noting or perceiving differences between things. Exactly.
Yeah.
With the intent, I want to say this again, with the intent to understand rightly. Okay? We have to understand rightly and make correct decisions. Okay? Too many times I hear this out in the public, hey, you can't discriminate. Yeah, you can. It's how you do it. You can't judge. Yes, you can. It's what judgment you use. Matthew chapter 7. Go back to the Bible. That's how you define the terms, if you can argue the terms. Okay? So we need to understand what discrimination is, what it means. It's not always what the culture says. Most of the time it isn't what the culture says, because the culture starts to lean in the evil direction all the time. Okay? So, with that, we understand here in the second chapter, we're going to talk about discrimination and respect of persons and how it's dealt with. How should we think about it? Okay? What was going on? I read from verse 1 to verse 7. What's going on here? Somebody tell me what's going on in the book of James. What's going on? From verse 1 to verse 7.
What you read is describing how people are welcoming the rich.
Right.
And putting the others away. And a lot of that goes to the fact that they're being selfish when they're welcoming the wealthy.
Okay.
Because they're looking at them as a source of wealth for themselves, a source of stepping up in society, if they can rub shoulders with these wealthy people.
Right?
It's not because, oh, we're so glad that you're here and you're gonna get closer to God. It's, oh, we're glad you're here and we can rub shoulders with you
And where's that going on? What was that going on back then?
in the church.
In the assembly, exactly. In the assembly. Keep that in mind. It was happening in the assembly of what? The church. The church of Christ, in fact. And so, if it can happen in the assembly, if it can happen in the church of Christ, belonging to Christ, what does that mean? What's the implication there?
It can happen here.
It can happen anywhere. Okay? If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. It does. We need to clean up here. Okay? Christ died for all. Rich, poor, young, old. He died for all. For the opportunity to go to heaven.
You take Peter, when he spoke in Acts 2 or 10, whatever,
Mhm.
he learned the lesson that God is no respecter of persons. Then Paul addresses that in Galatians 2, of course.
Mhm.
Peter knew what was right, but he didn't always do what was right.
Right.
Even though he had taught it, he hadn't quite understood it, or sometimes he had to go back and relearn, or Paul had to say, well, you're not treating people right, you're not standing for the truth of the gospel, and so on.
Right, exactly. That's the whole idea why James is writing this. Hey, you learned this already. Let's go back and check it out again. That's going to happen with young Christians. We have to be patient. I'm going to get him first. Yes, sir.
People in New York, normally when they're gonna immigrate in a normal way, move their families from some other country to New York.
Okay.
And for about 6 weeks, they're befuddled. They're confused. They're all fellas. And you say, what's wrong? And they say, I can't tell who's rich.
Okay. Okay. So that's true. You discriminate there. You're trying to find out, right? Okay. But we go back to the book of Acts. That's another thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was
Teresa.
just going to say, sometimes when we hear sermons on this topic, it's almost as though it's a sin to be wealthy. In no way is it saying to shun the wealthy and build up the poor. It's saying it's a level field in the church. We're supposed to love everybody.
That's right. Exactly right. It's supposed to be a level field spiritually in the church. Exactly. I forgot. What was my point? You don't know, do you? I was going to make a point. I forget. Okay, back to Acts and what you mentioned about Peter. How many languages did they speak?
2, 3.
4, 5, 6, 7. I think about 12 languages, right? Different societies, different people, different in nationalities, different ethnic groups. There's an example right there. They had to switch. They had to have the power of different languages so they could speak to the world and understand the gospel. Perfect example there. Okay? So, with that said, we move back to chapter 2. Now, when you begin to read chapter 2, let me ask this question. It's important for all of us to know all the time, or any new Christian. What is the theme of James? What is the theme of James? That's very important. If you're going to study the book of James, you better know that. And if you don't, let's find out this morning. What is the theme of James?
James was a how-to book.
Okay? Yeah, it's a how-to, it's practical living.
Faith without works is dead.
There you go. That's it. Faith without works is dead. What does that mean? I'll tell you in a minute. Okay? When we come back here, I want you to look at chapter 1 and verse 22. It says, but be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. That's the thing. Turn over to chapter 2 and verse 17. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Jump down to verse 20. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? You know, I think sometimes we read over this. This is the theme of the whole book. If you get this theme in your mind, you can apply it again to every section that you read, knowing the tree and the forest at the same time. That's what you want to know. You want to know the whole layout of the book, and you want to know the trees that you run into. You can't forget the overall view.